Welcome to everybody to this week's GMA Talk, where we talk about migration, we talk about refugees, we talk about migrants around the world. And today we are focusing on the United States of America and what is happening in the country when it comes to migration, especially with the recent administration change. This is a good time to start having this conversation or continue having a conversation like this. And I have a very special guest all the way in the United States joining me, and she will introduce herself shortly. Welcome to GMA Talk.
Hi, Gerard. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very, very excited to be here with a different vibe happening here in the U.S.
Yeah, very nice to have you, and yeah, looking forward to having a great conversation in terms of that vibe you're talking about. But to start up with, tell us your name, in terms of your profession and what you do.
Yeah, so my name is Dulce Dominguez. I am a Mexican immigrant living in the United States, in the state of Illinois. Currently a recipient of the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, which I know we're going to go into a little bit later.
Mhm.
And I am currently working at Alianza Americas as the Development and Communications Coordinator, so supporting our institutional fundraising efforts, as well as our communication efforts to our donor base. But in addition to that, I am also a co-founder for a grassroots group here in Illinois known as the Center for Immigrant Progress. And the Center for Immigrant Progress is a group of 6 undocumented and first-generation Latina women who have come together because we saw a need to bring more education and advocacy and community building to the local suburbs here in Illinois. So what we focus on is doing some of this policy education, engaging youth to be more involved or be more aware of issues concerning migrants, as well as providing direct support to undocumented students navigating the higher education system.
Okay, awesome. Thank you very much for the introduction, and sounds really amazing work you're doing in terms of helping other people around. And I look forward in terms of talking more about the support and getting more into that. But first of all, let's start with what is DACA, or what is known as DACA, and what is Dreamers? Are they the same, DACA and Dreamers, or what are the difference and what are the similarities?
So essentially, I think that Dreamer and a DACA recipient has come to be known kind of used synonymously. So the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, DACA, as it's known for its initials, is a program that was implemented as an executive order by President Obama in 2012, which essentially provides temporary protections or deferral from deportations for people that meet certain requirements, like entering the country, or being present here by, I think, in like June 15, 2007, being present in the country when that executive order was announced, having arrived at a certain age, having a certain level of education. So there's multiple requirements, and you have to provide evidence for each thing in order to be considered for the program. But DACA really is something that's, I think, more recent than what the term dreamer is. And a dreamer is known as somebody who is a young immigrant, was brought here to the U.S. Not by their own decision, but brought here by their parents or someone else, who is seeking to receive, higher education or in hopes of realizing that American dream. And the term, I think, was generated from a piece of legislation that I think now will be 20 years since it was first introduced in Congress, which is known as the DREAM Act, which essentially will provide a pathway to citizenship for people that meet these certain requirements of arriving as a child, having certain level of education. It really only would address one issue of migration or one identity. So I think that the Dreamer movement definitely has been essential in achieving something like DACA, because a lot of immigrant youth and advocates organized for this. And while it was not a permanent fix, the DACA program, it has been something that has granted young immigrants great opportunity that did not exist before. So I don't know if that kind of answered it. DACA,
Yeah.
DACA is a program. Dreamers kind of like an identity or a
Yeah.
name that has been
Uh,
not imposed, but that has taken up by some people and assigned
yeah.
to others.
Okay, yeah, very, thank you. And it's good, yeah, to talk about the difference, or what they stand for, because most of the time you hear it's thrown in the media, and some people, like myself, who don't live in the US, or even people in the US, maybe they also live there, but they don't know more information about like the difference of this program, or who are these people. Like we just hear dreamers.
And I think one other thing I would add about that, the Dreamers, is that I think that it was also a narrative that people that oppose migration kind of have also tagged along to. So they'll say, I accept Dreamers, I accept people that fit this Dreamer identity, but not anybody else. And I think in a way it kind of pinned people like me who were brought to this country as children to say, well, it wasn't me, it was my parents. But then that leaves out my parents. And I think that that narrative is kind of shifting a little bit, where we're going beyond just people that meet a certain box, to understanding that we need to be providing protections for all people, regardless of the level of education or certain characteristics or stereotypes that we attach to them.
Yep, I agree with you. Yeah, indeed, the protection needs to be there at all times, no matter how people identify or the immigration status. So, and then speaking of immigration status, because under the last U.S. administration under President Trump, there were laws that were changed in terms of certain asylum seekers, whether it's from Central America, from Mexico, from South America, like having to wait to file asylums, like whether near the border or not in the US, as asylum seekers like should be filing, or as immigrant like should get in the country and then claim the protection. So when you think of what is happening at the Mexico US border, like what is the situation around the borders? Because I understand there's even like makeshift migration camps like on the side of the Mexico side.
Yes, so the U.S.-Mexico border has always been very dangerous and hostile towards migrants. It has a long history of, causing pain and trauma to migrants trying to cross the border. And I think there's also something to be said that, a part of the border, a huge part of the U.S., was originally Mexican territory, but it was taken by the U.S. So I think it's kind of ironic to even think that we're, to criticize or criminalize people for wanting to come into this country. But yes, over the last few years under President Trump, there have been a series of policies and just rhetoric that has changed the environment for people trying to cross into the U.S. And essentially what the Trump administration has done is try to do away with any form of asylum. And they've used Mexico as, I've heard it used as like an invisible wall, or an additional enforcement. So as you might remember, former President Trump campaigned on this big border wall he was going to build. And the US and Mexico already has fencing and border along the border. What he was looking to do was build more wall and say that Mexico was going to pay for it. The wall has now been halted construction thanks to an executive order by now President Joe Biden. But some of the policies that were implemented in partnership with Mexico, while some of them have been halted, will have long-term effects. So you were talking about the Migrant Protection Protocol, which essentially forced migrants that were trying to seek asylum to wait in Mexico for a process that takes months. And some of the most dangerous cities in Mexico are where those migrants are being kept. And like you said, there's images of people camping there. And there's been evidence of gender-based violence, sexual assault, violence done by the military people that are there, both that are Mexican and the U.S. So in addition to that, when we saw the caravans or the mass exoduses
Mm-hmm.
coming from Central America trying to reach the U.S. The U.S. basically pressured Mexico into trying to lower that flux or trying to keep them from coming into the U.S. Pressuring them and threatening tariffs, which would have economic repercussions on the country, and Mexico gave into this pressure. They increased militarization at the border. They physically tried to deter migrants from coming from their southern border, which is the Guatemala-Mexico border. So that was one way that they were doing it. And essentially, these migrants were being pushed away without giving their due process rights. Some of them were shooed away without even having an asylum screening and a credible fear interview, and forced to go back to either their countries or wait in Mexico, where they will be in similar dangerous conditions. So it's not a safe place for them to be at. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Because you can only imagine, like for people who are living, some of them a lot for insecurity, or for the violence, or for the war, for the conflict that is happening, and some of them rightfully so, in terms of seeking for better life or better opportunities as a result of the hunger of the places that they come from, and even to not be able like to express the case, whether it's a case of refugee, a case of asylum seeking, or a case of just wanting to migrate to the country and not having that opportunity, but being kept out, at all costs, and then even some authority also caving like to this means of like keeping people out, because the movement of right and the protection of people, and it's protected under international law and international means. People have a right to asylum. It's not illegal like to seek asylum.
Yeah, and I think that's like one of the worst parts for me, that they have this right to understand what is happening to them, what they are being charged for, not being charged for, why they're being denied. And I don't think that any of these people that have been subject to this understood or were given a just opportunity to appeal what was happening and why they were seeking asylum. And Mexico knows the conditions in which these migrants are living, and yet they still keep them in those dangerous conditions.
Yeah, some of these things, it's just you just get to think of what leaders think or what lawmakers think, what is happening around. But in terms of further what is happening around, because also, at one time, the United States was, among like the largest resettlement of refugees, or even like where immigrants, wants like to migrate or settle in terms of their life and opportunity. So, but in the recent years, like we have seen in terms of the decline of U.S. receiving of migration, receiving of migrants and refugees. So, like, what is the tone like change like in terms of the country like contribute, like to the decline or the demean of people like being received in the U.S. More as before, and then also, what are the support that refugee and migrant like receive when they arrive in the country?
Yeah, so I at one time, like you said, the U.S. was known as the largest recipient of refugees, and I think at one point the ceiling might have been like at 110,000, and I think in this last year, former President Trump lowered that number to about 15,000 people, which is just crazy to me. I think he reduced it by like 80% from what it originally was when he came into office. And I think that this has something to do with, again, some more of that anti-immigrant, anti-hateful rhetoric that he was spurring during his campaign and throughout his presidency, in which he targeted immigrant and refugee populations as them being the issue of economic troubles or job loss or crime or things like that. So I think that that's something that has changed, that he has rolled back numbers of refugees that we are accepting. He has he essentially tried to get rid of, and actually he did get rid of a just asylum system. And in addition to that, he tried to roll back protections for people that are already in the U.S. under temporary protective status, which is TPS. So these multiple kind of humanitarian aids that the U.S. was providing essentially were done away with. Like he was not, cooperating or working with or adhering to international law and international rights. So I think that's kind of some of what we've been seeing. Not only are we criminalizing immigrants that are here, both legally and illegally, but also people that are here legally because of humanitarian needs.
Mm-hmm.
So to tell you a little bit about the refugee services, the U.S. assists refugees after they arrive into the U.S. After they have a final screening by the U.S. government, refugees are picked up at the airport by a representative of one of the different resettlement agencies that are in the U.S. And then after that, they're given they're connected to resettlement agencies that help them find housing, which could include basic furnishings, appliances, climate appropriate clothing, and some other type of assistance. But I also know that some states also have their own offices for resettlement, so they also provide their, own types of assistance. And I did a little research just because I haven't worked with refugee populations as closely as I have with undocumented. But in the state of Illinois, they have 3 different kinds of support that they have provided, which is short-term cash assistance, and that is administered through the Illinois Department of Human Services. And under this program, refugees are eligible for federal cash assistance. They get a refugee health screening, which is a program administered by the Illinois Department of Public Health, in partnership with 5 other local clinics in Illinois. And then there's also an employment and social service program, which operates in partnership with Illinois nonprofits and agencies to help them get connected to employment opportunities. And I think under President Trump, we've seen funding done away with this because all of this is funded through federal dollars. And as we have seen, money has been dramatically cut back, or was dramatically cut back for different services in order to reallocate that money towards the border wall.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that picture in terms of the support and services refugee and migrants receives in the country, and also the numbers really, that the decline, in terms of the priority, that the last administration had in terms of the wall and in terms of migration, in terms of the refugee cut down. Then when you look at the hopes or the changes that this next administration hopes to bring forward or implement, whether it's in terms of asylum seekers, refugees, or undocumented migrant, what are some of the promising changes, that the current administration has shown, or even what are some of the policy change that has been already put as a result of executive order, and then how can people also influence policies and push the current administration?
Well, I think I'll start a little bit with some of the things that the Trump administration did, because a lot of the things that the Biden-Harris administration has done in these first almost 2 weeks, maybe it has been 2 weeks, is basically sign executive orders to undo what he had done. So as you might remember, in 2017, the Trump administration signed a Muslim ban, which banned people from certain countries, well, majority Muslim countries, from coming here. They were subject to harsher screenings, and essentially what the Biden-Harris administration has done is sign an executive order to do away with that. And people that were previously denied, if they choose to apply again, will be reconsidered for those visas. So that was one thing. And then another thing was, starting in 2017, the Trump administration tried to essentially phase out DACA. They tried to eliminate the DACA program. So for the last 3 years, the program was in litigation limbo. There was multiple lawsuits you didn't know the program wasn't in full effect because it wasn't taking new applications, and people weren't allowed to apply for things like advanced parole, which gave them permission to travel outside the country under certain circumstances. So President Biden has signed an executive order that preserves and fortifies. So it's still a little vague, but essentially it's saying, like, affirming that the DACA program is a legal program that he plans to support. However, we're still waiting on a court case that could decide kind of where the program takes place. And then some other things that the President Trump had done was at the end of the Obama administration, there was like a list of priorities, I guess you could say, or like people that were on the list for deportation, to kind of prioritize who gets deported, who's not. And the Trump administration essentially came in and said it's a free-for-all. Like, whoever is here that is undocumented, or you think is undocumented, or you think is a threat to this country, they can get deported. So you saw a lot of people that were unjustly deported, and you saw cases of people who were here legally who were not given a chance to, provide their paperwork, and were sitting in detention centers on their way to get deported. So that's just how, like, subjective it became. So now the Biden administration has given directives to the Department of Homeland Security to resume kind of those prioritizations that they had previously under the Obama administration, which was individuals who were suspected of terrorism. That in itself provides some gray area that could also cause potential harm, and it did under Obama. But those that entered after November 1st, 2020, and those convicted of aggravated felony release from criminal custody. So that kind of gives more specifics as to who is a target for deportation, as opposed to anybody being a target for deportation. He also signed an executive order to essentially stop deportations for 100 days while they reviewed their systems and reviewed the procedures that they were taking place. But there is a Texas court case that essentially is like trying to fight back against that. And we do know that there has been deportations since that was signed. So that's also to be seen what's going to happen. Another executive order that he signed was halted the construction of the border wall. So then that money is currently being, screened to see where else that could be allocated, or how else that money could be used. In addition, he also signed another executive order that undid what Trump was trying to do, which was not count undocumented immigrants in the U.S. Census. And the U.S. Census is critical to, ensuring that there's sufficient resources for states, for, community planning, political representation. So under this executive order, everyone will be counted as they should be. And I think one of the most exciting things that a lot of advocates and a lot of immigrants are just, eager to see what's going to happen next was this Citizenship Act of 2021, which was a proposal by Biden to the Senate saying, like, this is my plan, this is what we would like to see. And essentially the Citizenship Act of 2021 would provide pathway to citizenship for various people in phases, I guess you could say. So TPS and DACA would have less strict or less harsh of a pathway towards citizenship status, as opposed to those who have been here but do not have that. I think that it's very promising, but as it stands right now, we're still waiting to see if it is going to get introduced in the Senate and whether it will pass. So many of us, while we are excited to see that, we're kind of on, we want to see something happen before we get our hopes up.
It's because when you speak about in terms of like the deportation and the roundings, that was happening, because I think at one point, like, it's made a lot of international news, or especially I'm not sure if international, but at least here in Canada, like in terms of like the type of like any time or any moment, like you would see or you hear like these immigration officers searching people or knocking people on doors or rounding people up, like in terms of like putting them in these detention centers, or even like deporting them right away without even due process.
Yeah, that it's not an exaggeration, and it sounds scary, but
Yeah.
it did seem that way. And
Wow.
here in our community, there was an instance just recently, a few weeks ago, where the person was um, basically like they misled the person, making them think that they were the police, the local police, and saying that, we need to bring you in for a ticket, we need to blah blah blah. So they
Mhm.
brought them in, but it was really ICE, it was really Immigration and Customs
Wow.
that were arresting him and detaining him. And I think that they also tried to go back to the house to round up whoever else was there. And I say round up, and it sounds like horrible,
Mhm.
but that's the language that they use.
Wow.
And there has been just atrocities that have been committed by ICE
Mhm.
agents with people in custody, as well as at the border. So I think it's
Mhm.
just it's critical to highlight that these agencies in themselves from inception were just wrongly created, and they're doing exactly what they were meant to do, which is target vulnerable migrants.
Mhm. Wow. And then when you talk about all those actions that have happened, and of course, with the current administration, things don't change overnight, or many other things won't change, or will remain the same, or people will remain in limbo in terms of protection, in terms of safety, in terms of opportunities or citizenship or even residency. So then, how can people like influence their policy wise, or like what can citizens, do like to push policymakers and the current administration, to really protect migrant refugees, asylum seekers, no matter how you came into the country or who brought you into the country.
I think this reminds me of that like better vibe that I was telling you at the beginning. It feels like a different field that we're playing in, because for the last 4 years we were resisting. But I think that this new hope, or kind of this new optimism, brings a good and a concern to me. So it's good because it's gotten people energized. We've seen what the power of organizing and the power of collective advocacy can do for our country. But on the other hand, it also brings concerns that people might feel like because we voted him out, things are fine now and things are going to be fine. So I think that like some things to keep in mind is that we need to keep the same energy. And as we've seen, things are not going to change overnight. It's going to take time. So I would urge people that are interested in supporting migrants and refugees to continue to stay educated on, the latest updates on where these executive orders and proposed policies are going, how they're being implemented, so that we know who to advocate, when to call our Congress people, when to call our representatives and say, like, I want you to support this, or why hasn't this been happening? So I would say advocate with your local representatives, but then also, engage in hard. It might be hard, but engaging in hard conversations with your neighbors is also important, because we have, a network, a circle of people, and we also bring influence to our circles of people.
Hmm.
And I think it's important to change the narrative on migrants and who they are, to continue to build the support for pro-immigrant policies. The last thing I would suggest is that I think donating is sometimes not something that people think about, but I think donating is a way of showing your activism. So donating to local organizations, or donating to national organizations that are on the front lines doing this work is also one way of supporting refugees and migrants.
Yeah, thank you very much, yeah, for that, because it's good like for people like to really know which ways or how, yeah, they can really push or help
Mm-hmm.
drive like the conversation, have this change like in act or coming into force. Then when you think of specifically young people, because young people can be reckless, can be change makers, can be everything in between. And nowadays we are seeing, many of them not waiting for the invitation, to be at the decision making table, not waiting for somebody, to tell them you belong here or you can do this. They are taking actions into their own hands. Uh, how or what actions can young people do, or what can they do specifically, to help and support or address migration issues in the United States?
And there's a lot that can be done, and I think that um, youth that have kind of developed this leadership have also a responsibility to find ways to engage others. And I think that our grassroots group, Center for Immigrant Progress, really, grew out of that, of us knowing that perhaps we don't know everything right now, perhaps we don't know what way we're going to do this, but we know something needs to change. So we want to participate in creating something that young people can get excited about, that young people can feel a part of, that they know that while they might not know everything, that they have a safe place to learn about it. So I think that some significant ways that youth can help in addressing refugees and migrants is those that are directly impacted. If they feel safe and comfortable, it it really makes a difference to share stories, to amplify stories, to shift that narrative that I was telling you about. I think
Mhm.
stories are very powerful, and can make a difference in terms of what way we are pushing policy. I think another way is civic engagement. We know that there are, some of us that are undocumented might not have voting powers, but we do have a voice. So being assertive, being confident in what it is that we are proposing, because we're the ones that have lived it, is also very important. And those that can vote have the power to directly, vote for representatives that are going to make decisions that support migrants and refugees. So I would say education, using your voice, and voting are some ways that youth and young people can get involved.
Mm. Awesome. Yeah, that's a very great way in terms of, yeah, for shaping narratives or supporting or helping with the cause or getting even more involved. And yeah, and I'm glad that you touch in terms of that, citizenship aspect, or, like no matter your status, no matter how you feel you belong in the country, if you did believe that you have something to contribute, whether you can vote or not, you can still, like, push change or encourage lawmakers, or even like push fellow citizens, to really support certain actions, because at the same time, maybe 5 or 10 years from now, you'll be voting, you'll have like the power in your hand also.
Yeah, and I think also organizations have like an ability to give young people this sense of leadership so that they can feel inclined to also take initiative. Um,
Mhm.
so there's just multiple ways, and I think the
Yeah.
way that we met at the GFMD at
Yes.
the youth forum, I think that was a great space because it just
Yeah.
made you feel like your voice mattered and
Mhm.
you were exchanging ideas with people
Yes.
who have a different background, but it was
Uh-huh.
an exciting opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with you. Yeah, speaking about like the youth forum on migration, just being able to connect or hear, what other fellow people or young people are doing in the communities, addressing refugees and migration issues. It was, yeah, maybe we have this chain of support, chain of command, because most of the time, you don't hear stories of young people like in migration. So that was
Yes.
like very, very exciting. You just hear of this big intergovernmental organization or international organizations like helping or supporting refugees, but it was very glad and amazing and exciting, like to hear. This is young people on migrations issues, on refugees issues, on migrant issues in the communities around the world. So it was very, very inspiring on that end.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
So then, in terms of bringing everything to full cycle of this really nice and informative, and really thank you very much, like, for really painting a clear picture for us in what is happening in the United States and in terms of these issues. Is there anything that I didn't ask or I forgot to ask, or anything that you'd like to highlight, whether about your work or about refugees and migrants in the United States?
I think I would just add two things. One, I would be kind of the changes that I'm looking to see within the Biden-Harris administration. And I think that in the short term, there are opportunities for them to kind of split up the big bill that they were trying to introduce and include essential workers and TPS and DACA recipients, to be eligible for a pathway to citizenship in the next COVID relief bill. So I'm really looking for that. And then also looking at repealing some of the changes to the public charge rule that were made, which the public charge rule makes people subject to harsher, I guess, screenings of whether they are eligible to apply for permanent residency. And that in itself has deterred many people, including refugees and legal migrants, from accessing public services. So I'm hoping that there is some immediate change around that. And then also ending deportations and developing a plan to reunify families that were separated, both under the Trump administration, but then also under the Biden-Obama administration, the Obama-Biden administration, because there was millions of families that were unfairly deported. And then lastly, I think I talked about it a little bit earlier, but I'm just very grateful for this space that you have provided, because it helps us, get those narratives out there. It helps us tell stories. And it provides a platform for young people to share, what is our opinion, because we're experiencing it, we're working to kind of push it in our own way as well. And I think it's important to provide these kinds of platforms for them to share their opinions and to share what their perspective is. So I'm grateful to you, Gerard, and I was very happy to participate.
No, thank you very much, Dulce, for joining us, and to our amazing and awesome viewers. Please, this is the kind of information we really need out there. We need to be informed. We need to learn of what is happening in the United States and around the world when it comes to refugees and migration issues. So please, stay tuned here on GMA Talk for really some of this in-depth conversation and on ways to get involved. And thank you very much. I really appreciate for joining us again. And congratulations really on an amazing work you are doing in the country.
Thank you so much, Gerard. It was great to speak to you.